Everything starts with a bad idea, doesn't it? It all started, I was actually in school for mechanical engineering. I was the kid that when I graduated high school was supposed to succeed and get a conventional job, making good money, and settle down and have a family pretty young, probably. Somehow that didn't stick, which is surprising because that's how I grew up. But about 3.5 years into the degree, I was like, I don't think I want this. And so I was off for a summer. I had been taking summer classes every year, so I never had time off. But I took a summer off from school to kind of reset and figure out what I wanted. And I ended up getting a job at a local hot rod shop down in my hometown of Noonan, Georgia. I walk in and asked them if they needed any help. Turns out the guy that cleans the shop had just quit. And so I'm 20 or 21 at this point. And I'm like, all right, well, can I clean the shop then? So the next day I'm in there sweeping the floors of this hot rod shop. Things progressed and eventually the shop was too clean for me to clean it anymore. So I started working on the cars. And after a few months, the owner of the shop, was Kenwood Rod Shop, owned by Randy Allgood. He's like, hey, would you want to be my shop foreman when you want to handle the day-to-day things, supervise all the projects, order parts, manage the guys that are working for us? I was like, all right. I looked like Justin Bieber. So getting respect from the 4 middle-aged men that were working at the shop was an issue. So that's when I grew the beard. I never went back to school as a result because I loved what I was doing every day. I just stopped going to school. I started building cars full time. While I was doing that, I came across this show called Roadkill. Some editors from Hot Rod Magazine were going on crazy adventures in beat up old cars. And they had a YouTube show, and I was a huge fan of what they were doing. And while I was working at the shop, they held a contest. The contest was basically, send in a video, make a profile on our website, and we'll pick 8 of you to come hang out with us for a week in California. Well, I was one of those 8 that got picked. I was like, that's a really fun week, but it's also an opportunity to meet 2 of the most important people in the industry that I'm in. And so I got the bright idea to do what they do, buy a car and try to road trip it home. And so I got on the Los Angeles Craigslist while I'm in Georgia looking for a beater car to buy and attempt to drive across the country. I'm a broke kid straight out of college working at a hot rod shop. It's not something you do for money, it's something you do for love. So I didn't have a lot of money, so that limited me to cars that were below $2,000. That's not a good car. There was this one in particular that really stuck out to me. It's a beat up old green station wagon. It was listed for $1,600. It was a 1972 AMC Hornet Sportabout station wagon. I had never seen one before in my life, and I just thought it was just quirky and weird enough to be noteworthy if I showed up to the event with this car. I asked the owner, do you think it'll make a drive to Georgia? The guy looks at me like I'm insane. And he's like, well, I drive it a lot here in Los Angeles, and it does fine, so it might, but I wouldn't do it. And I'm like, all right, well, I'll take that as your blessing. The main flaw that I found was that the rear main seal was basically missing. So it was just dumping oil out the back. And that's what my argument was. I'm going to have to buy cases of oil to drive this thing across the country back home. Would you take any less? He's like, I'll take $1,350. I was like, sold, we got a deal. I got more money for gas now. So I buy this car and I drive it out to the event that they were having for the contest winners. And as soon as I pull in the parking lot, David Freiberger, who used to be the editor of Hot Rod Magazine, is like, what is wrong with you? Because he knew I was from Georgia because they had watched the entry videos. And he's like, what are you doing with this? I was like, well, I'm going to do what you guys do. I'm going to road trip it home at the end of this week. And he was like, you're an idiot. And I was like, yeah, probably, but just stupid enough to fit in with you guys. So I'm out there all week. We have a great week racing the brand new Hellcats and Vipers. But at the end of the week, I was very happy to be climbing into my beat up old station wagon for a cross-country road trip. LA all the way to Georgia with virtually no issues in 3 days. So 2,200 miles in a station wagon that I just bought that I knew nothing about. And I mean, it wasn't without its issues. It overheated a couple times. And it actually used 28 quarts of oil. That's how bad this leak was. 7 gallons. Because I had bought this car, I left with David Freiberger and Mike Finnegan from Roadkill's phone numbers. I was the only guy that left with contact information because they wanted to know what happened. And so I get home and I text him and I'm like, hey guys, I made it home. Why do you guys make this look so hard? Because they fail every time they try anything. And immediately Freiberger texts back and is like, hey, write a story for me. And so the very first story I ever wrote was about my own cross-country trip in my own beat-up old station wagon on this silly adventure that I had done just to make an impression. So I write the story. It runs in Roadkill magazine as a 2-page spread. So that's the first story I wrote. And about this time, Finnegan from Roadkill moved to Georgia. And he was about 45 minutes from where I grew up. And so I was like, hey, Mike, I know you're new in town. If you ever need any help with any projects, let me know. And that's when I started helping Finnegan in his shop. We built a lot of cool stuff, and we actually started a YouTube channel called Finnegan's Garage. We did tons of stuff to his projects, but we actually ended up putting direct port injection nitrous on my AMC Hornet wagon. So we did like a cam in the engine, we did intake and exhaust with a 4-barrel carburetor, MSD ignition, all parts that are much too good for this vehicle. The car kind of gained a bit of notoriety from that YouTube show, and during all this time, I kept going to Hot Rod's events and Roadkill's events. So I road tripped this car all over the country. I think at this point, the car had been coast to coast 3 times after buying it. It had done 2 Hot Rod power tours. It had been to Zip Tie Drags in Tucson with Roadkill. It had been to Roadkill Nights in Michigan with Roadkill. And I'm driving it everywhere. It's not going on a trailer. I'm just road tripping this car and showing up and reminding the guys at Hot Rod that I exist. During all this time, I had switched to a different shop. I was working at a place called Metal Union where I learned to build chassis and metal shaping and stuff. So I was picking up the practical hands-on skills of hot rodding. The last project that we worked on with Finnegan before I moved out west was a boat. 711 cubic inch Sonny Leonard racing Hemi in an 18-foot boat. Stupid. The motor makes 1,275 horsepower naturally aspirated, and we put twin turbos on it. So I worked so hard on that project. We built it in 3 weeks. Throughout all this, Finnegan was like, hey, you helped me so much, I'm taking you to SEMA with me. So I'm out at SEMA just in awe of how big the hot rod industry really is once you're inside it. And I enjoyed the whole week there, but at the end of the week, I was at dinner with some of the people from Roadkill, and they offered me my first paying photography gig. But I met this girl who was also a photographer. We hit it off, we hung out all weekend. I ended up flying out to California after I went home to take her on a date. Date went well, and so we kept talking. I'm like, well, this isn't going to go anywhere if we live on opposite sides of the country, because she's from California. And I'm like, you know, one of us is going to have to move. So yeah, I get up, I pack my beat up old station wagon, sell everything else, and drive clear across the country and move to Los Angeles. I get there, and I actually interviewed for a news position at Hot Rod Magazine when I got there. Unfortunately, they picked somebody else, which I was very bummed out about initially. And so I just got a job at a basic shop where I was doing basic maintenance at first, but then they realized my fabrication and metalworking skills, so I started working on all the hot rods, which was fun for a while, but I was very spoiled with the places I worked out here because like we were building $250,000 cars. And then I went from that to changing people's oil in Hondas and stuff. And I got to the point where I was like, what am I even doing here? And that was about the point that things started to go poorly in the relationship. About the time we were going to break up, I was like, I need to get away. So I go on another hot rod power tour in my car, which meant I needed to drive my only mode of transportation, this 1972 AMC Hornet, all the way to Kansas City from Los Angeles for the start of this event. One night we're at a hotel parking lot and we realize we should do a burnout contest here in this hotel parking lot. Well, my car is not, really good for burnouts with the 273 gears and an open diff, but I found out that if you get it into second and use the nitrous, it does great burnouts because you're doubling your wheel speed with an open diff, which means the top of second gear is around 200 at the tire. And I realized that that makes a lot of smoke. So I do this burnout, and the next day is the actual Power Tour burnout contest. I'm like, all right, I got to do it. So I enter the burnout contest, and I end up winning the thing. So the car used to not be able to do burnouts on Finnegan's show when we started, and then it wins the Hot Rod Power Tour burnout contest. And what's really funny is that burnout contest is the reason that Douglas Glad, who is my current boss at Hot Rod Magazine, realized that I was on Power Tour. And the next day I get a phone call from a number I don't recognize. They offer me a job on the spot. And what's really neat is the job that I had interviewed for initially was the news editor, which is basically sitting in the office and rewriting press releases and things that have happened that you've seen in the news online. I might have gone mildly insane doing that. So it was actually a blessing that I didn't get that job, because the job they gave to me was called network editor. And that is such a vague title, and the job description was equally as vague, to the point where I got to interpret it to what I wanted it to be. It turned out I was going to be the guy traveling all over the country to all their events, basically doing event coverage, shooting features, hosting videos, all stuff that I had practiced doing with Finnegan on his YouTube show, as well as for the websites for the shops that I worked at. Now they were going to be paying me to go visit those friends and visit those events I wanted to be at anyway. And so the first month, I kind of had hands-on guidance from my boss. And after that, it was kind of like, you do whatever you want. About 2 months in, a couple of the long-term staffers that had been there for years left, and I started writing for the magazine, which was really cool to me, because that's a magazine that I grew up reading and, really influenced me a lot. And to see my own name on a story in there with my photos, and then a little column that I get to write every month. I only get 250 words, but it's enough to say something in this magazine that meant so much to me. Was a really surreal experience, and I'm still not used to it, and I've been there about a year and a half now. It's a neat experience, and I'm honored to do it, and to see how the stories that we put in the magazine affect people. If their car goes on the website, they're excited about it. But there's something special about that paper copy, that if their car makes it into that copy, like, I've seen grown men cry. That's the coolest thing, to be able to be a part of that and have that opportunity to preserve the legacy of something that's been around since 1948, when the Hot Rod magazine started.
VINwiki is proud to be partnering with Mobile App Hero to continue changing the way we look at documenting automotive history. We're working with them to bring updates to our mobile and web-based app. So stay tuned to their social media and ours, and keep telling the stories of all the cars you love.